Hi. Today, I want to talk about getting the most out of your final salary scheme. Because although from April 2022, you can no longer add service to the final salary scheme, it is going to continue to be a big part of your pension and use the final salary figures right up to when you do finally decide to leave. Now, that could be next year, it could be in 10 years' time. And so today, I'm going to look at something that I've called the Pay Plateau and how you can use it to get the very best from your final salary part of your pension. If you've ever been hill walking, you will have probably experienced that moment where you think the horizon in front of you is the peak, only to get there and find that the peak is still some way off. And worse, you have a long flat section, or even worse, another valley to go down before you can start climbing again to reach the summit. Now, before you start wondering why I'm burbling on about mountain walking, when this is or should be a talk about pensions, please bear with me, because this is a very good visualization that's going to help me explain how to get the very best out of the final salary part of your pension. The key analogy here is that to get the best final salary, you do want your final salary to be as high as possible, at the greatest peak. Now, some of the final salary stuff is very easy to understand. If the teacher finishes on a salary of 40,000, they're going to get half the pension compared to if they were finishing on 80,000. But what happens if this mountain range here shows the career path of one teacher who, after reaching a peak of 80,000, carried on and dropped back to a post that paid 40,000? Well, that could lead to them getting a much lower pension. I say could very deliberately because I'm going to go on and explain how they could protect their final salary pension so that it always uses the highest salary figure. You should pay attention to this if you have any final salary pension in your history. If you started teaching before 2015, you will have a final salary part to your pension. And if you started before 2012, you could have well over 10 years in the final salary scheme. Now, there are some built-in protections already in the final salary scheme. The main one is that as well as using your final salary, that's the last 12 months, it is also compared to the average of your best 3 consecutive years in the last 10. So in this case, that final 12 months of 45,000 is beaten by the average of the 3 years that do include that £80,000 peak figure. But this teacher has missed out on using their very best salary, that 80,000. They missed out on using it. So let me show you how they could have protected that salary and get to use it in their final salary pension calculation. And this is the key point. You can protect the peak salary. You can protect it by taking a break from the scheme. Importantly, you don't have to leave employment to do this. Simply opting out of the pension scheme for a month will create this break. This forces the scheme to calculate your final salary pension using that peak figure that came just before the break. Now, the main reason this hasn't been used widely in the past is because it can mean that your service after the break doesn't get counted in working out your pension. Well, after March 2022, that is no longer a problem because there isn't any more final salary service after that point. Yes, your salaries will still be used, but you can't add any more service. You're all going into the new career average scheme. So this creates an opportunity to make sure you lock in any peak points to be used with your final salary pension. Of course, the problem is working out if you are at a peak. Going back to my mountaineering analogy, you may have your vision on the peak only to find out that you might climb higher later. Well, there is another advantage to taking a break when you believe you have reached a peak, and this goes back to how the final salary figure is calculated. This chart shows the pay of a teacher at the top of the main pay scale, and it looks as though the last 12 months is their best salary. But hold on. Before we make that decision, all those earlier salaries get adjusted by inflation. So let me just add in what that does to the value of those earlier years. What this does is increase the value. So in this case, the best 3 years are those here on the left of the chart. So that false peak is going to grow with inflation. Now, you might notice that these 3 years here are actually outside the 10 years. So if this teacher hasn't locked them in, those top performing years, 2008 to 2010, they are gone. They're not inside the 10-year limit for calculating the final salary pension. So looking at this false peak, it is going to continue to grow with inflation. And if the pay rises and promotions do not match inflation, even that false peak could end up being more valuable than a later real peak. But surely there's a downside. Suppose even with inflation that your early peak does not add up to more than a later real peak. Well, the thing is that if that does happen, you still get to use that real peak. When all the calculations are done, whether it's the false peak with inflation or the real peak at the end, you get the best option. Of course, if you do reach a second higher peak, you may want to take another break to protect it in the same way. The downside, though, of taking a break is that your career average pension will be a little less because of taking the break. But how much of a reduction? After March 2022, everybody's going to be in the career average scheme. So missing a month from this scheme will mean that career average pension is going to miss out on a month. But how much is that? Well, the career average scheme increases by 1/57th of your salary. Missing 1 month is therefore 1/12th of that. So if we take an example of a salary of 50,000, you divide that by 57, the 57th, and that is £877 roughly. That's if you miss the whole year. However, missing just 1 month means you miss 1/12th of that, just over £73. So that means taking a month out of the career average scheme, if you're on a salary of 50,000, will cut your career average pension by around £73 per year. Now, I can't see into the future, and it depends how much you've got in your final salary pension, but there's a very good chance it's going to be more than the amount that you're going to lose from a month out of the career average pension. Now, I can't see that far into the future. I mean, I can probably see that we've got a pay freeze coming and that's being held. Ministers say that we are ending the pay freeze, but they won't commit to the fact that whether we get a pay above inflation. I'm almost certain that teachers are not going to be getting any kind of inflation busting pay rises anytime soon. But to work out if and when you should take a break is a very individual decision. So you consider what balance might be right for you. On the downside, you have 1 month's loss of your career average pension. Of course, everyone's circumstances are different, but these are some of the signs to look out for to see if you've reached a peak. Have you reached what could be a pay peak? Now, that could be when you've reached the top of the main or upper pay scales. It could be when you gain a promotion with a TLR responsibility, a deputy headship or a headship. Any of these positions from which it may take a while to progress. I personally became a head of year. Now, that post definitely ran for 5 years. So I could have, at the beginning of that 5-year process, decided I'm going to take a break because this is a post I'm going to be in for a while. After 12 months in that position, your final salary will be at a peak. Don't take a break at the beginning of the promotion. You've got to wait for the pay to have actually taken place for 12 months in order for that to become your highest final salary. Now, having seen that you're at a peak, it could be worth looking ahead to see if you've got any pay rises or any inflation coming up that's not going to be beaten by your pay rise. Now, you don't have to make the decision until the end of your first 12 months. So you're probably going to be in a very good position to see if you've got another opportunity for a promotion coming up or whether you're likely to be staying in that post for some time. And finally, keep an eye on inflation. Remember that in salaries from before you take a break will continue to be revalued each year, increased by inflation. And it's quite possible, even very likely, that they will overtake your current salary. It's almost absolutely certain, well, it is absolutely certain, if any pay rise we get is below inflation. Now, to finish, let me tell you a bit about my personal story and how I came to be a bit obsessed with helping people get better pensions. I do this because I was stunned when I looked back and I realised just how much doing this could have improved my pension. I started teaching back in 1990, and within 10 years I was at the top of the pay scale, and within 3 more years I had a TLR as a head of year. My pay in 2003 was 37,500 odd. Now, looking back, I should have recognised that promotion to a head of year post was a potential pay peak. It's the kind of post you stay in for a number of years. And I knew I had no ambition to move any higher into senior leadership positions. I finished my career in 2017, still on that same TLR, but then with a salary total of 47,500. Now, because of the best 3 in 10, my final salary for pension purposes was 52,076. Inflation has worked in my favour, and so that number is significantly more than any salary I was actually paid during my career. My top actual salary was that 47,500. My final salary, because of inflation, was over 5,000 more than that. Now that sounds like a good deal, and I got a good deal, but I could have got even better if I'd been paying attention to this scheme back in 2004 when I first got my major TLR. If I'd taken a month out that year after getting my head of year post, my final salary would have been based on that 37,500 figure from 2003. Sounds a lot lower, doesn't it? But don't forget about inflation. When inflation was added, it would be worth £58,604. That's over £6,000 more than the actual salary I got, over 10% more than I was actually going to get. Well, what does that mean for my pension? Well, the more years you have in the final salary scheme, then the more difference it will make. For instance, on just over a 20-year career, that will make a difference to a final salary pension of over £1,500 a year and £4,500 in the lump sum. But even on a 10-year career, that would make £750 a year difference and over £2,000 on the lump sum. Now I'm going to remind you, giving up 1 month from a career average loses me £73. Looking at that, that's a pretty good bet if I'd taken the month out on this, where I was getting a peak, to get, well. So should you take a break when you hit a pay plateau? I'm afraid only you can decide that, but look out for the warning signs that may signal that you've got an opportunity to protect and increase your pension. To consider this, you should see if you've got years in the final salary scheme. This is before 2015, even more if you're in the schemes before 2012, because in that case you'll have at least 10 years still in the scheme. It should happen when you've received at least 12 months of your higher salary. Don't make that mistake of opting out before you get that higher wage paid into your bank. When you reach a possible ceiling, that is top of the main scale if your school isn't good at getting people through the threshold, or top of the upper pay range, bear in mind, again, you've got to be paid it for at least 12 months before you take that month out. And at that point, you're probably going to know whether or not you're going to be making any further pay progressions. Following a recent promotion, when no promotions are likely for a while, do also bear in mind that if you opt out of the scheme, you won't have life insurance that's offered by the scheme for that month. To be honest, that's easily replaced by taking out separate life insurance, and the cost of which is far less than the nearly 10% you're paying each month to be in the scheme. The key thing is to look for a time when you believe your salary, when given the boost of inflation, is going to outperform your future salary progression. So thank you for listening, and I hope this is going to help you get a better pension when you finally finish.